This beautiful frame you see here, this is an Austro Daimler Superleicht. I got this a couple years ago. It was on eBay for $99, brand new. $99 for a brand new carbon road frame? You bet I clicked that buy it now button. I didn't have use for it, so it's been all around the shop for the last couple years. Finally though, I've collected all the parts I need. So in today's video, we're gonna put this beautiful Austro Daimler Superleicht together. If that interests you, let's get started. I've put together several carbon frames over the past few years. I can say with absolute certainty that the quality of this frame is a notch above everything else I've built. You're looking at the upper head tube. Note that this has been machined after the bike was painted. There's no overspray in here, and the bearing seat is perfect. There's no voids, it's flat, and it's the same angle all the way around. Also note that this is a consistent thickness. So it's not wavy and it doesn't get thin anywhere. Every other carbon frame I've put together, I've had to lap these bearing seats so that the bearing would fit and set flush. This one's not going to require any work. That's one of the reasons I say the quality is so high. This frame uses a PF30 bottom bracket. They went with an aluminum shell. I measured this with a set of calipers and it is true to size. Note also that the paint here is smooth and there's no overspray into that bottom bracket. This has been well prepared and it's ready to accept a press fit bottom bracket. Anywhere on this frame where you would bolt something in place has been machined after it was painted. This is the brake mount for the rear caliper. Note that it's been machined, that the paint is smooth and there's no overspray on it. Typically when I get a frame like this has been painted over and I have to dress this surface. So this is a nice step that you don't commonly see. I also want to point out the finish on this frame. Typically when I get a frame out of the box, it's been clear coated and they've called that done. There's always a little bit of orange peel in the finish. This frame, after it was clear coated, it was sanded and polished. So the finish is incredibly smooth and incredibly glossy. I know they did this because there are a few spots on the frame where I can still see the sanding marks, where they didn't get buffed out. Because the paint is so smooth, you can see a couple of defects in the layup. The biggest one is here on the top tube. There's a little bit of wave where it joins up with the seat tube. It's not a big deal, it's not something I noticed, but it's something to point out. So I'm really impressed with the quality, the build of this frame, but there are some things about it I don't like. The first is the head tube. So it is a tapered head tube. That's not uncommon on carbon bikes. This one is a 1 1/8 to a 1 1/4, and that's not a common size, at least not anymore. So if you need to replace the fork, finding a replacement may be difficult. The frame uses an integrated seat post or a seat mast. The problem with this is I am going to cut it to a length to set my seat height, but once that seat height is set, it really can't be changed. You can move it up and down a little bit using shims, but if I were to sell this frame in the future to somebody taller than me, they really wouldn't be able to raise the saddle much. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Kind of once you set this frame is fit to whoever it was cut for. The frame uses a press fit bottom bracket. I haven't had good luck with those not making noise over the long term, so I am going to use a threaded bottom bracket, which should resolve that, but that's also something to keep in mind, is it uses a press fit bottom bracket. And then the last thing to note is that this frame only accommodates 25C tires. I like to run 28s, that's not going to be an option here. I've been riding on 25s forever, so it's fine, but that's also something to be aware of, is if you want to go any wider than 25, you're kind of out of luck. The first thing we need to do on this build is cut down the seat tube to fit my saddle height. So I need to figure out now what height my saddle should sit at. I measured my other bikes, and you would think that measurement would be consistent, but it's really all over the place. I found that the bikes that have a more upright seating position also seem to have a higher saddle height. So I went back and I remeasured just the bikes that are similar riding position, and I found that I need 26 3/8 inches from the center of the bottom bracket to the center of the seat rails. I've got a choice between two seat mast toppers. This is the one that came with the frame. It's made out of carbon fiber. After they made it, they bored it to size. That left the wall a little bit thin in some spots, and I'm worried this one may crack. So I bought this one. This one is shorter than this one is, so if I go with this one, I won't have to cut as much material off the seat post. I'm not sure which one I'm going to use. I think I'll let the scale decide. Let's see what each one weighs. So we'll start with the carbon fiber. That one comes in at 166 grams. The aluminum one, 141 grams. So because this one requires less material to be cut off of the frame, and because it's lighter, I'm going to go with the aluminum. If I change my mind later, I can always cut the post down a little bit more and switch over to the carbon. Because that frame is so big, I wasn't able to get a good square cut on the tile saw, so I need to square that up. I made this little cup and I cut some 80 grit sandpaper to fit inside. I'm going to use some dish soap as a lubricant and I'm going to sand that square. So that's the hard part done, and it really wasn't that hard. That little tool I made to sand this square did such a nice job. I'm really proud of that. It looks just fantastic. So the bike now is ready to put together. So this is the drivetrain I've selected for this build. Most notably, I'm running a 1x electronic drivetrain on this road bike. I've chosen Shimano's R8000 levers. These are Di2 11-speed for rim brakes. I'm using a GRX 1x crankset. This is an 810. It's got a 42 tooth chainring. And then for the cassette, this is a Shimano XT M8000. This one's an 11 to 42. The rear derailleur, this is the only one that works with a 1x setup that's Di2. This is the RX817. It does have a built-in clutch. And then for the rest of the system, I'm going to run Bontrager XXX handlebars. These are 42 with a 100mm stem and R8000 rim brakes. It occurs to me before we put this together, we ought to weigh it. So I'm weighing here, this is in kilograms. So it's weighing in at 1,040 grams or 1.04 kilograms. That is 2.29 pounds. And so the fork weighs another 368 grams. Before the water in the tile saw freezes, I want to get the fork steer cut to length, but I need to figure out what that length is. I looked to see if I could find published specs for the max number of spacers I can use on the fork, and I couldn't find anything for this frame. So I checked some major fork manufacturers. Moots recommends a max of 30, Envy a max of 40, and Whiskey a max of 50. I'm going to shoot right in the middle. I'm going to go with Envy's recommendation. So I've fitted 40mm of spacers here above the bearing. Envy also recommends leaving 5mm of steer sticking out above the stem. So I've added a 5mm spacer here. So I'm going to draw a line right at this point, and that's the length my steer should be. This is a starting point. We may have to make it shorter, but this is the max length it should be. So I'm going to take this outside, and before I lose the daylight, I'm going to cut it down with the tile saw, just like you saw me do with the seat post. I want to take a quick moment to talk about the guy who sent me this frame. His name is Fred Thomas. He included a letter in the box with the frame that gave me some tips for assembly and a signed letter with a warranty. I thought that was pretty cool. He also called me, left a voicemail. I don't answer the phone for anybody, so I didn't talk to him directly, but in his voicemail, he just wanted to make sure I was happy with the frame. When I was researching this frame, I read somewhere that he brought back the Austro Daimler name. He said he wanted to make bikes that reminded him of the ones he rode when he was young. I've included a link to his channel in the description. He's a really nice guy. You guys ought to check him out. Because this is a 1x Di2 drivetrain, it's really pretty simple. So we're going to have a pair of levers up front. Both levers will control the rear derailleur, and I'll set them up the same. We're going to have a wire that runs through the handlebar that connects the shifters, and a handlebar junction that I'm going to put in the left-hand side. I'm going to put it on the left because the hole in the frame for Di2 is on the left side. So I'll run that wire in, down, and then I'll set a 4-port junction down above the bottom bracket. From there, we'll have a battery in the seat post and we'll have a rear derailleur. I've got everything hooked up. I tested it. Everything seems to work, except for the left-hand shifter. It's not doing anything. I double-checked. Everything's connected correctly, so I'm going to connect up my computer and see if it's a configuration problem. All right, so here's the problem. The left shifter is configured to shift a front derailleur. I don't have a front derailleur, so I'm just going to change the setup so that it shifts the rear derailleur as well. All right, so let's see if that worked. Yeah, that's what it needed. So everything works. Now it's time to bundle all the wires together, push them in the frame, and then I'm going to put in the bottom bracket. I'm using a Wheels Manufacturing bottom bracket. This one is a thread together bottom bracket. I like these because they don't creak. The big downside though is they cost about 4 times what a traditional press fit bottom bracket would. The torque spec for Shimano Hollowtech crank arms is 12 to 14 Newton meters. I usually split the difference and go to 13. I'm using some old DT Swiss wheels on this build. These are R1650s. They're not particularly light. They weigh in at just under 1,700 grams for the pair. I like these mostly because they were cheap. I got both wheels for just under $100 on eBay. There's a downside, the rear. When I spin it, I can hear that the free hub bearing is shot. So I'm gonna have to pull that apart and rebuild it, but I'll do that later. I'm gonna run a pair of Continental GP5000 tires on this build. These are kind of the gold standard for road bike tires. Any tire review, they always end up on top. I've been running them for years, had good luck with them. And then I recently did a video where I explored weight reduction on a bike, and the biggest bang for the buck was TPU tubes. So I'm going to use some TPU tubes. These wheels are rated tubeless, but I'm not going to run them tubeless. I like the TPU tubes. I've got tubeless tires on several of my bikes, and the last couple times I've hit something on the road, they've left me walking. One time it just wouldn't seal up, and the other, I was about 40 miles from home. I plugged that tire. It made it another 20 miles and it plug blew out and I couldn't seal it up. So twice now I've needed tubeless to do what it does and it's failed me. These TPU tubes are light, so I could just throw a couple of these in my jersey. If I've got a flat, it's as easy as swapping out a tube. I mentioned earlier I'm using Ultegra R8000 brakes. I'm going to cable those up with just some bulk Jaguar LEX cable. I got this from my local bike shop. They charged me $1 a foot, I think. So I'm going to get this cabled up and then we'll get the brakes adjusted and then this bike is pretty much done. I got the bike fully put together. It's in rideable condition, which basically means it's got the pedals on it. I don't have a bottle cage yet. I had to order one and it hasn't arrived yet, so we're gonna weigh it without the bottle cage, but I wanna see now what the final build weight is. I set up my scale on a pole here, basically so I'd have enough room for the bike not to rest on the floor. I'm gonna show you guys the weight from afar so you know there's no shenanigans going on, and then I'll zoom you in on the scale. It's probably best by the saddle. All right, we'll let that come to rest. So that's 7.67 kilograms or 16.9 pounds. That's a bit heavier. It's about a pound heavier than I was really hoping for. So we're gonna have to see if we can find a way to put this thing on a bit of a diet. The expander plug, it feels heavier than it should. So it weighs in at 49 grams. There is a lot of extra material here that really isn't doing anything. So I think I can put this in my mill. We can remove some of this excess material and maybe bring the weight of this down a bit. It won't cost us anything except we'll have to use some expensive tools. My milling machine is currently set up for resurfacing some exhaust manifolds, and I don't want to mess with that setup, so we're going to do this in the drill press. So I've got a 1/4 inch end mill chucked up in the drill press. I've put that knurled piece in the vise here, and what I'm going to do is just cut a groove right in the center between those two spring channels. So I finished the expansion plug. I got it milled out on all 3 sides, just like you saw. And I put it back together, but instead of using the springs, I just used these lightweight rubber O-rings. These are not heavy, so I don't know if that saved me any actual weight, but we'll see. So now the expansion plug weighs 45 grams. The bolt that holds the stem cap in place, the one that does the preload, this thing is about twice too long and it weighs 7 grams. So I'm going to use a hacksaw and just cut it down to where it's not so long. The way I cut down a bolt like this is I just use a hacksaw. I thread the bolt into a nut and I clamp that nut in the vise. When the vise is tightened down, it squishes that just a little bit and it holds it firmly in place. The edge of the nut also makes a good surface for the blade to ride against, so I get a relatively clean, relatively square cut. I cut down the preload bolt. It's now the right length. It looks like it weighs 5 grams, so we cut 2 grams right off the end of it. That was 2 grams we got for free. I really like the skewers that came with those wheels. These are the old school type that have the adjustable lever. Unfortunately, they're kind of heavy, so let's see what they weigh. So that one's at 49. Now I'm going to tear it, set it to 0. That way we can compare the new skewer. So this skewer is a carbon titanium skewer, and I borrowed it from my Century. So it is 26 grams lighter than the DT Swiss skewer. So I am gonna put that on the Century and I'm gonna run this one. This is the saddle I had on the bike. This is a Giant Fleet SL. This is my favorite saddle. They're not particularly heavy. This one weighs in at 225 grams. So I'm gonna zero that out. I have this saddle. It's an Ultimate and it's a full carbon saddle. I've never ridden it because I think it's kind of an ugly saddle, and at the time I didn't like the stub nose, but then I kind of got into those. So let's see how much lighter it is. So it's exactly 100 grams lighter than the Fleet SL saddle. So that's a pretty good savings. I think I'm going to put this one on. All right, so those weren't significant changes to the bike, but they were things that I had that were free. So let's see where it weighs now. See if that was at all beneficial. 7.54 kilos or 16.62 pounds. I mean, I'm gonna have to live with that because to really shave the weight down more, I'm gonna have to replace some expensive parts with some more expensive parts. So I think this is it. I think it's 16.6 pounds with pedals, which isn't horrible, right? That's pretty good for a road bike. You know when you're chasing down a Strava PR or trying to race cars on South Boulder Road and you need speed and you need it now? This bike delivers. Push down on the pedals and it takes off like a rocket ship. It also handles really nicely. It's quite agile, especially when you're doing a long descent with sweeping corners. I found that really enjoyable on this bike. I did have one situation where I approached an S-curve faster than I should have. I was going 45 and I realized my error and got on the brakes like my life depended on it. And the bike got really unstable, wobbled like this, concerningly so. So I let up off the brakes, it smooths out, and then I use that agile handling and I push my way through the S-curve. Aside from that, and that's probably something to be aware of, I'm really happy with the way this bike rides. I didn't realize that the 1x versus 2x drivetrain was such a contentious topic amongst cyclists. I put out a video about a year ago where I showed converting from a 2x to a 1x. There were 3 basic arguments in that comment section, and I want to kind of talk about each. So the first one that came up time and time again was that 1x drivetrain are only for people who live in flat areas. And that has not been my experience. I live in the Colorado Front Range, and every ride I take has at least 750 feet of climbing. I routinely ride a 1x, and I've never had a problem with that. So I don't think that's true. The other 2 have to do with performance. So one was that 1x drivetrain have what people call a watt-sucking chainline, and the other was the jump in cadence between gears. People said it was just too great. So for watt-sucking chainline, all of the bikes that I've put 1x drivetrain on, the drivetrain has been designed to be a 1x drivetrain. So like the GRX 1x, it was engineered by Shimano to be a 1x. That chainline is exactly where it should be. Maybe if you threw something together or cobbled something together from a bunch of different parts, you might end up in that situation. But even the bike I did where I had an Ultegra crank and a GRX rear derailleur, the chainline was just fine on that. So that also has not been my experience. The third one, the jump in cadence, I've been giving that a lot of thought while I ride. And something that occurred to me, my average cadence is 105 RPM, and I am comfortable anywhere between 100 and 120. At that speed, I don't even notice the cadence jump. But I imagine if your average cadence is 70, if you do a gear shift and now you're suddenly spinning at 40, that might feel like quite a bit larger jump. So that's really the only thing I can come up with. My cadence is that high because my legs are almost 50 years old, and every year the cadence goes up a little bit. They're just not as strong as they used to be. So I want to hear what you guys think. Not so much about which is better, a single, double, or triple. I mean, you can give me your opinion on that if you'd like. But more about why is this topic so contentious among cyclists? What do you care about what drivetrain is on my bike? I just don't get it. I also want to know what you guys think about this bike. I didn't know anything about Austro Daimler until I saw this frame and I got a good deal on it. If that hadn't happened, I still wouldn't know anything about him. The guy who's trying to bring back the name, Fred, he's got a dream and he's trying really hard to realize that dream. I think his marketing isn't very good. So I want to know what you guys think. Is this a frame you would consider? Do you think it's worth a build? Or do you think it's just another boutique bike? So that's it for today's video. Until next time, I'll see you later.